This podcast is brought to you by Celicopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. Celicopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter has sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at Celicopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-CELICOPTER, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@celicopter.com. Celicopter. List it, sell it, done.
All right, and welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. My name is Halsey Scheider, and this is episode 2 with longtime friend Emily Spates. Emily, what's happening?
Not much, man. It's January. Well, it's February. God, see, I don't even know what month it is already. It's February. We're getting ready to go back on contract in 3 weeks, actually. So. Oh
my gosh! Well, I can't wait to get into all that. I know a lot of our listeners are going to be excited to hear about what you're doing and what contracts you're flying and things like that. In fact, full disclosure to our audience, all 5 of you. First off, thanks for listening. Second off, there's no true agenda, right? I haven't got to catch up with Emily for a long time, so I'm actually really excited just to kind of talk shop. And really the true purpose of this podcast is just to talk about helicopters. So I'm excited to hear about what you're doing. But I figured, just as a little icebreaker, take a little trip down memory lane. I want to throw myself under the bus a little bit. But I also want to talk about my favorite CFI interview on the ground portion, that is. I don't remember if we flew together. But
no, I flew with Marcus, not you.
You had a CFI interview with Marcus and I on the ground. And the whole purpose of the interview is, hey, we're going to have these guys and gals teach a lesson and, you know, settling with power and whatever. And I think that you were at the end of the day, and if I had to hear about settling with power one more time or, you know, low G mass bumping, I was going to do something. So I was like, do you remember what you taught us? Because I remember it.
I do. And as soon as you started this, it popped in my head. And so if you look ironically right behind my shoulder, the picture.
Yeah, I see it.
Kind of, that's just a hilarious, great tie-in. We were just doing a quick introduction. You know, where are you from? What's your background? And I remember mentioning I grew up in Vermont. I'm from New England. And I do believe it was you that was basically, it's like, the only thing I know about Vermont is maple syrup.
Yep.
And it just kind of went from there. All of a sudden, I just remember Marcus being like, you know what? Scratch your whole lesson. You probably spent days prepping. You're all ready for it. And teach me how to make maple syrup. And that's what I taught you guys. And on top of the funny thing, I grew up on a maple orchard. My parents have been making maple syrup since before I was born. So
that
it was
so cool.
Yeah, it was super funny. I thought it was really just a great way to do the interview, actually, looking back on it. And it still cracks me up. But I actually do mention that every now and then with people prepping for a CFI interview. And I'm like, you know, just be prepared to talk about or teach something you know about or you have an interest in. Yeah, that was just great. I just made the day.
Yeah, that was cool. I remember I was actually thinking about it when I was driving today, kind of some topics to talk about with you. And I was like, man, I should have done that with more people, because it was like, essentially, if you can teach someone something kind of random, unexpected, then of course you're going to be able to hopefully go in and teach something that you know about.
Exactly. And oddly enough, since that interview, we took that into CFI training at one point. Kind of like day one of teaching, everyone's nervous. They're like, oh my God, I got to teach auto rotations and low RPM. And they were just like, you know what, come in day one, prepare something. I don't know, if your previous job, your best hobby, your favorite interest, something you know about, something you enjoy. And it actually was crazy how cool of an icebreaker it was to get them into the mode of standing in front of people in a classroom and just talking about something.
Yeah.
So thanks, Halsey, for that. You actually helped other CFIs through that.
Look at that. All these years later. Well, and if you think about it, right, like one thing that I think is nerve-wracking for people learning how to become a CFI and teach is, first off, we're helicopter pilots. So I never signed up to be a teacher necessarily.
Right.
Now, you and I both know that I like to talk a lot. So talking and getting in front of people is never really an issue, but structuring it for me was the hard part. But a lot of people are uncomfortable. And the thing that actually made me most uncomfortable is, like, it's hard to talk about technical topics that people already know about. because you're almost feeling so judged. So I feel like if you can go into it and teach me how to make maple syrup, or, let's talk about our other mutual interests, the Packers, and tell me about them, right? It's like you can break the ice. You can make people. Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous. But, essentially you can, make it not be such a scary thing. And I could actually see that being a really effective icebreaker.
It is. I think it was beneficial in the long run of the way we were able to actually incorporate that into CFI training down the road. It just eases everybody up.
Well, I like to hear that little Halsey rubbed off, because I have to be honest again to our 5, maybe 7 listeners at this point. But, I'm 32 now. I went from high school to practically flight school. Whereas someone like yourself, which we're going to talk about, obviously military background, you were really an adult going through a flight school, where I was like a kid going through flight school, becoming a flight instructor at age 20, and being at this management levels at, 23, 24. I just thought I was the berries, like, oh my God, I'm like the coolest guy. And I look back at that and I know that some of the way that I acted, as Zach Whitehead would say, is like I managed like I coached football, because I also coached like little kid football at the time. And I was like,
all about that.
It's like, oh my God. Like, I look back and I cringe, and I feel like I just want to throw it out there to the world that if you had experiences with me in the past that were negative, that I apologize. And I feel like, specifically with you, I feel like one time I just was so mean. Like, we were flying. It could have even been on your stage check. And I was like,
we did fly together.
I think I was like beating you up, and it was just like, I just want to apologize. Just, 5, 6, 7 years later.
I won't hold it against you.
Okay,
you're not the only pilot who has abused other pilots or myself during a stage check moment. So.
And that's true. I mean, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, I think last year, and I was talking about kind of defending myself. He was like, man, your stage check sucked and you're a dick and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, thanks. But I felt like personally, I wasn't actually very well prepared going into being a CFI. I felt like my stage check was super easy. I felt like my check ride was easy. And then I became a flight instructor. And if you're in this realm right now and you're about to become a flight instructor and you're listening, I would really take note that it's a big responsibility and it's a kind of a scary thing, really. It's this blind leading the blind. And
it is. And, and also part of that, though, I think you can probably look back and experience this. We all started out baby brand new instructors here, started doing stage checks, moved into more advanced flight training. I know I changed the way I did stage checks and instructed from day one down to, almost a year and a half later. It was not the same. Like, I was not the same flight instructor.
Yeah.
And I hope for the better at the end. But I think that's something too people realize. You do evolve with it. You realize what's working well for you, what's working well for students, and also what's not working. And you got to be able to adapt with that.
Yeah, it's totally true. It's like I always kind of felt like this out of body almost. Like when you're in the moment learning, there's so much going on, especially at Hillsborough, right? Like 18,000 people talking on the radio, most of them Chinese, so you can't even understand them. Like just this crazy overload. So like just trying to focus was one thing. And then when you become a flight instructor and you can kind of look almost from this outside perspective and you can see like, oh, that's what my flight instructor was saying. Or that's,
this makes sense all of a sudden.
You start to see it. So it's like you're not even flying, but between that, 200 hours and 1,000 hours or however long you end up instructing, you really become such a better pilot just by watching the mistakes. You're finally in a mental space.
It's the observation level for me that I finally, hundreds of hours into being a flight instructor, actually caught on that your student can fly by themselves. You're not definitely guarding the controls every moment of the flight anymore. What allows you to do is take a step back and observe, listen to the radio more, watch around you more. And I think that's also part of being a flight instructor is you have to be able to understand you're still learning. Like, yeah. I'm sure we all threw those brown flight suits on at Hillsborough in meeting number 1 and we're like, oh, we made it. Yeah, that's the beginning. I mean, that's just the beginning of it.
It's so funny how that brown suit meant so much. I mean, at least for me, it meant so much. I mean, for our listeners out there, we went to Hillsborough Aviation. That's now Hillsborough Aero Academy. But it's a big school, and the flight instructors would walk around in these tan suits, and they would click together. They would all smoke cigarettes in the same spot. They would all look super cool.
It was a club.
It was a club, and I just
part
remember.
Of the club, man.
I just wanted that damn suit. I mean, I just, I don't know if I was more excited to just be able to put the tan suit on or actually get paid to fly. But I just remember that being so funny. But to go back to a little bit of your training and whatnot, I guess you'll have to remind me. So you started flight training after me, obviously, because was I already instructing when you first started, or was I still in training?
I think you were an instructor when I got to Hillsborough. I actually started my flight training previous to Hillsborough. I started at Chesapeake Bay Helicopters in Virginia. That's where I did my private training and some of my instrument commercial training there before I moved out to Oregon to finish up the rest of my training.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you, military background, correct? Navy?
Correct, Navy. Yep.
Thank you, by the way.
Thank you.
Just some slitty stickler that did not. I should have gone to the military. I feel like that's like if I'm gonna have a regret, it's gonna be like, you're such a tool. You should have but I just went, I guess, straight to the Sally Mae line and got my student loan for helicopter school. But so you started at Chesapeake Bay. Did they have like a military 141 training?
So there were a 141
similar?
School, and this was definitely a few years before I was in Hillsborough. This is while I was still active duty. They're a Part 141 school. We didn't have the same GI Bill, VA funding that what you and I are familiar with now with the post 9/11 GI Bill. So it was the original Montgomery GI Bill. So what that includes, they didn't pay for private training. So all your private training is out of pocket.
Okay.
And a lot of it, the whole point of the GI Bill originally premise was you transition out of the military. They're paying for you to have training to be employed. And so in the eyes of the VA and everybody beforehand, it was you can't work as a private pilot, so we're not going to pay for it. Obviously, we know how that developed over the years.
Yeah.
Where we ended up with a full post 9/11, 4-year degrees paid for, start to finish through double I paid for. So it was a little bit different. So I did my private training all out of pocket on my own on the weekends when I had days off from work at my command out there. And it was cool. It was a great, Virginia Beach is a great location. We were flying out of Hampton Roads Executive Airport. A really pretty spot, cross countries down the coast to North Carolina, go to first flight, check out the Wright Brothers Memorial.
Nice.
So it just was a great location. I separated from the military though, and that's kind of what led me moving out west. Was one of the job offers I took right off was moving across the country. Okay.
And that's ultimately what brought you to Hillsborough. So it wasn't necessarily even the flight school that brought you to Hillsborough. It was a job.
No, my job brought me out west. It actually brought me to Tucson, Arizona.
Oh.
And I was going to start trying to finish flight training out there, and just things kind of fell through. So I started talking to Hillsborough, and Hillsborough is actually what brought me to Hillsborough.
Okay, I gotcha.
So I just moved it all the way across the country prior to that.
Who was your first instructor then at Hillsborough?
Josh Gianni.
Oh my God. The man, the myth, the legend.
I was like, how did you not remember it was Josh?
How did I not remember it was Josh? I love Josh Gianni, who's actually now flying for Maryland State Police.
Yes.
Which is awesome. And Josh, I know that you're one of my now 8 listeners. So if we could have you on the podcast, it would be great.
Definitely you should.
The last time I saw Josh was at his wedding, actually. I was a proud guest at that wedding. Had a little too much fun, if I recall. But yes, Josh Gianni is the man. In fact, some of my fondest flying memories are R-44 checkout with him. We had some very good times. He's a good stick. Oh,
Josh is a great pilot, and he's an amazing flight instructor. And I think one of my favorite things with Josh was, to me, and we'll talk about this later on too, when it comes to like CRM and an aircraft and everything, to me, it's always about the personality of the person you're working with and when you get something that clicks. And Josh was one after the first few flights. I was like, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. He's easy to fly with. He's a great pilot, But I did a majority of my training finishing up at Hillsborough with Josh.
Yeah, Josh is like that guy. He's just like, probably not just in the helicopter world either. It's like, he's just that dude that you can connect with. He's just, it's just something about him. So,
I do actually, now to think back about, I do believe that we did have a great awkward long cross country flight where he was very upset and it involved losing bicycles in downtown Portland. And I'm pretty sure you were involved in that.
I'm going to plead the fifth on whatever that might be. If I was involved, I don't necessarily remember, which is probably an issue.
I always joke too, part of flight training when you do long cross countries, I feel like there's a inadvertent therapy session on both parties sometimes. And I just remember we're flying along and getting this story, and I was cool, guys. This sounds like a fun night. Like,
we had a lot of very fun nights down. I can remember his place there in Goose Hall. What's it called? Goose Hollow? Is that area of Portland? Oof. Sounds weird. It doesn't sound right. But anyway, Josh, we love you. We should probably move forward from Josh. But Josh, I want you on the podcast. All right. So you did finish up your training then using the VI benefits. And so what are the GI, the VA? I think I mixed the two. What did that look like for you then? So did you have your commercial all the way through your double I then paid for by the VA?
Yeah. So when I started at Hillsborough, they had implemented the post 9/11 GI Bill, which is the updated, newer version of the previous one. What that was allowing flight schools to do is partner with a college and develop their flight program tied to a degree program. So I transferred out here, enrolled in the flight courses at Portland Community College, which was our partner, and proceeded there all the way through my double I.
Yeah, so I, of course, am very familiar with the VA back then. Now, I feel like after I left and kind of moved on from the flight school world, some things happened within the actual VA in regards to some flight schools. I don't believe Hillsborough, but some schools were abusing the GI benefits, essentially using an A-star for private through double I.
Yeah, instrument training in a 407. Like,
I mean, it's very necessary. I mean, you should definitely.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, we'll talk about the 407, how much I love that aircraft shortly.
Yeah.
But I would love to be a double I, and all my students did all their instrument training in the 407. I'd be ecstatic.
Can you imagine like leaving as a flight instructor with like, I have 200 hours in the Robbie and 900 in the 407.
Right.
Like, that would be awesome.
Yeah. But unfortunately, those are the situations, you're right, that led into some of the changes and revamping of the VA's funding for flight schools and programs. I've been a little far removed from the flight school portion the last couple of years, especially on that level. So I don't know 100% exactly where all the schools are at with that. I know it's been an issue.
I'm very curious to learn. And in fact, I have a note out and a response back from our mutual friend, Jared Friend. And I know that he's very well connected into the helicopter school world still. So I'm excited to chat with him and kind of learn a little bit more about that VA program, because ultimately I do feel like, one can look at it like they're paying for your training, but essentially you've earned that training. And the fact that some schools took advantage of it, and it was also a lack of oversight on the VA and whatnot, but it does kind of frustrate me that it was taken advantage of, and who loses? It's the veterans that lose.
Yeah, 100%. It was when they changed the program to include private training, which was a huge step. You working in your position in the flight school, you understand how much, just for some students to be able to come in and finance that initial private training is a big ordeal. So the fact that they were willing to, we'll take you from 0 hours, pay for everything, was huge. I mean, that started, you remember how many VA students we had? That started so many people's careers.
Yeah, it's
on
huge.
It. Once the system obviously got abused and things started changing, got a little out of hand with the spending, I understand if I was a taxpayer.
Of course.
That you look at it and be like, wait, we just spent how much to send somebody to school where this place does it for a fifth of the cost? And I understand that. I also, at one point, I know there were proposals going back to dropping the private funding, which, like I said, I paid for my private out of pocket. I was privately funded during that part of my training. You're not an employable pilot, essentially, at that point. I'm on the fence, if that's how they want to go back to it to make the system better. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I think it would hurt people down the road. Maybe you would lose interest. A lot fewer people, I think, having to put that much money up front might deter people from trying to get into this industry. But we'll see. Yeah, Jared obviously would be the man to talk to about this down the road.
I'm excited to talk to him about that and some of the new European connection, the things that are happening. So it sounds like
they've got some good stuff going on.
Some cool things happening at the Aero Academy there. So I'm excited to get with Jared. So you get through your flight training. You were hired as a CFI. I remember that because hey, you did it. So how long? You have to remind me of the overlap. How long was I still there? Because I feel like maybe you were even teaching CFIs by the time I left. So I feel like.
Yeah, I hate to say it. I feel like it wasn't that long ago, but it was definitely a few years now. So I was definitely instructing when you left. You were Dan Dopker taking over as the chief pilot while you were there.
Double D.
Yep. So we had Dan there. I think I was doing stage checks about the time you were leaving, maybe.
That makes
I don't know
sense.
if I was already in CFI training. But yeah, I was going to start about almost 2 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of where I was at. Obviously did some of the different roles and things. And I think, honestly, that really actually, what am I talking about? I was a flight instructor forever just because I took on different responsibilities.
Right.
And I kind of look back and I'm like, man, I should have just got my hours and gone, but part of me is like, well, I guess it was kind of nice to get some management experience. And I lived in Oregon. I was from Oregon. So it just kind of made sense to
exactly.
be close to family.
It's a great spot to be too.
It is. In fact, Hillary and I spent this whole last summer in Oregon, which was very awesome.
You guys.
Yep. Actually, I think you offered, I put a Facebook call out to have if I could rent someone's house for the summer. And you actually reached out.
I think I did. Now that we're talking about that.
You're going to be on a fire contract. Yeah.
Never home in the summertime.
Go figure. So interesting where we ended up staying. I'll have to fill you in on that. But we got to hang out in Oregon. And it was a lot of fun. And actually, I'm full time with my business now, Helicopter. But to keep current, I picked up a part-time position with a news company here in San Antonio, which is Heli Inc., which is, big nationwide.
Yeah.
And I think the helicopter is also in Portland. So I'm hoping at some point, an email will come across Portland pilot wants a day off, and I'll be like, oh, sign me up. It would be so fun to go back to the old Hillsborough stomping ground and fly out there again. It'd be amazing.
It's always a good spot to fly at.
Yep. So you go through training, worked as a flight instructor, CFI training, all the works. How and when did you transition from kind of the flight instructor role into, what you're doing now, or what was your first non-instruction job?
So, kind of you kind of have a similar background, actually. My first non-flight instructor job was flying tours at Mount St. Helens in a Jet Ranger.
Oh, yeah.
That was with Hillsborough on it. And that was kind of fell into that role. End of 2014 is when Hillsborough Aviation sold the flight school. And goodness. That was, I know.
That's when I left. 2014 is actually when I left. So that's
So that was
crazy.
The end of that year, November, is when Max sold the flight school off. And the next spring season, obviously, Mount St. Helens was starting up in May. And I just happened to be interacting with people on our 135 side and talking to them. And then it was like, hey, what's your plans? Are you leaving? Are you looking for a new job? Or what'd you think about flying Mount St. Helens? It kind of just fell in there kind of conveniently. It was, hey, you've been around. I'd gone and shot some photo work up there for the company the summer before, actually, of you flying.
With me. I love that shot.
I was like, it's actually one of our background shots.
Yep, I have it. You can't see it in the corner of my room right now, but I have the black and white.
The one with Mount St. Helens in the background.
Yeah, it's so epic. That whole photo shoot was super cool, actually. You got a ton of cool photos. That
was such a great day. It was just the most random, hey, you shoot photos all the time. We're going to send an aircraft up, chase Halsey around while he flies tours and take cool pictures. And how fun is that?
Yeah, and I feel like I felt like I didn't even know about it. Y'all just showed up, and I think
that's a good probability too.
I think Franz might have called that morning or something. It's Franz, right? I don't know why I'm blanking. Yes. And he's like, oh, they're doing photos. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So yeah, I remember that. And it was cool to get all those fun photos. And I mean, yeah, they're incredible. I think that Mount St. Helens one, that was my Facebook background forever, like the black and white with the mountain in the background. So I was backup. I was just like the backup guy there. And so every time I got to go fly Mount St. Helens, it was like not only awesome because I was just so like finally in a turbine, like because it took me forever. Like I did actually at one point think like I'm never going to fly a turbine helicopter. Like I'm just going to be a piston pusher, blah, blah, blah. And so it was just so fun to go. Terrified of letting go of the button. I was like, I'm going to let go of the button when I'm starting. Like I just had like this. God. Like, don't let go of the button. Flying a Jet Ranger again now, part-time, a couple times a month. And I still have this, like, I just don't let go of the button. But I remember just always kind of freaking out. I'd be driving up to Mount St. Helens, like, the button. But one thing that I loved about Mount St. Helens was like it's literally the most beautiful place that I've ever flown. Like
it's definitely in like my top 3 favorite flight areas ever. So I think that's just such a cool opportunity to be able to go up there.
Yeah, it's like here's your first turbine job. We're gonna put you in a Jet Ranger. We're gonna put it full of people, and we're gonna have you fly 10,000 feet up on top of a
fly
mountain.
Around a volcano. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like
yeah. By the way, it's still smoking. You're like, okay, what could go wrong?
Yeah, that was definitely some entertaining commentary. And if you remember too, it's not like other big tour companies where you've got an audio recording, multiple languages, somebody hits play and you just cruising along like you're giving the whole tour as the pilot.
Yeah. No, you're the pilot, the tour guide, you're everything.
Yeah. So part of what I really enjoyed too with that is it kind of gave you the opportunity to learn more about the air. Again, I'm from the East Coast. Like I knew very little about Mount St. Helens until being exposed, through this job on there. So I thought it was the most interesting thing. They spent 2 days up at one of I think the Johnson Ridge Observatory and then one of the other visitor centers talking to some of the park rangers, but just getting cool info about it. Then obviously the company's been flying tours up there for a long time. So talking to the other pilots that were up there, Soren, Mike, yourself, Dan.
I mean, my go-to tour thing was to just make stuff up, really. I did that at the Grand Canyon, too. I was like, I wonder how far I could take it. Not necessarily.
I'm not going to throw names under the bus, but there is a great tour conversation of one of our previous pilots up there talked about Harry Truman, which those of you not familiar with Mount St. Helens, Harry Truman's kind of a big deal up there. He perished in the eruption, but he stayed right to the end. Passengers on board asked if it was President Truman, and the pilot, not being an American native or U.S. citizen, said yes at first.
Oh,
and
God.
Then was like, oh, wait. No.
I don't think so.
I use that joke in probably like 75% of my tours because I thought it was the funniest thing ever. Like, you literally had a passenger convinced that President Truman died at Mount St. Helens.
Well, the thing that would crack me up when all tours, and honestly, I don't remember a lot of my St. Helens tours because I think I was like white knuckling the whole time anyway, just because it was like, just don't break the helicopter,
Right.
And like, I just remember going from like Spirit Lake up to the crater, and it was like, oh my God, like this little helicopter does not want to do it. And so I'm like, just don't break the helicopter. Oh, and I have to give a tour, but I did the Grand Canyon tours for a while with Maverick, and by and large, I had a great time. In fact, I enjoyed working for that company. I thought it was going to be like, a whole bunch of dudes that had all these big egos, like what could happen with 70 guys flying, tours. But it was actually super fun. But it was something that was so obnoxious was unfortunately the people that we're giving tours to would ask like the craziest questions. They'd be like, can you tell me the composition of each layer of the Grand Canyon, like the rock? And I'm like,
whip out my master's degree in geology. And
yeah, no, unfortunately I cannot. But if you look down there, there's a river, like what are you going to do? So
yeah, I did actually, I got really lucky. I had a tour up on Mount St. Helens, and it was actually somebody who'd worked with the Army Corps of Engineers right after the eruption, heavily involved with the recovery efforts and what happened later in the Toutle River Valley.
Yeah.
And he brought a family member who grew up in that whole I think Kelso, Longview area, remembers everything from before the eruption. And he just asked me right before the beginning of the flight, and he's like, hey, I've worked up here. I haven't been up here in 20 years. Do you mind if I do most of the talking? Because you really want to, as the flight path progressed around, explain like, oh, I remember we put this dam in and that road. And that was so cool. I was like, I'm just going to sit here and fly.
Yeah. Like, and you probably learned a ton of stuff.
Exactly. It was kind of at the end of the flight got a little strange because I glanced over this gentleman. He's talking away. His eyes were teared up at the end. He hadn't been up there in 20 years. So.
Well, that's cool. Mount St. Helens in itself is kind of profound, but I think something that we take for granted as helicopter pilots is just the experience of flying above anything, let alone a volcano, but anything. It's such a different perspective. It's such a different vantage point. It's exhilarating. It's exciting. It's a roller coaster for some people. Like it's it's your Monday morning, right? For us, but it's like,
right.
A big crazy experience, just the helicopter itself. So I definitely have been around a lot of people that were just overwhelmed by the moment of being in the helicopter. So
right.
You flew the Mount St. Helens tours. Did you do that for 1 or 2 summers?
I did that for 1 season. During that season of Mount St. Helens, that was the year we actually started operation down in Sedona, Arizona. So we'd had to put an aircraft down there.
Okay.
So the following, that first winter after the Mount St. Helens tour season kind of ended, I went back. I was actually back at the flight school as a flight instructor for the winter, just picking up off the ramp random 206 Jet Ranger gigs out of the Portland area.
Sure.
And then actually went down to Sedona and did some flying down in Sedona, which that's another breathtaking, very surreal flight experience just because the scenery is amazing. And that was just that was year 2 of me being a 135 pilot. And early to, I'd say like July timeframe, I remember our chief pilot calling me and was like, so I was on days off. I was back in the Hillsborough area at home. And it's like, if you're around, come in the hangar, talk to me. I'm just cool. What's up? It was basically like, we're going to stop that thing, but I need you in a long ranger carted work fires. And I know so many people would be like, oh yeah, that's where it's at. I'm pretty sure my heart stopped for a second. I was like, do you really think I should be doing this? I did not think I was at anywhere close to being like, you want me to what? Like,
you're like looking behind you, like, who are they talking to?
Right. Was there another person in the room with us? Did you call the right person in? Just because I still felt like I was so green and junior in this utility environment. That's kind of just where that summer rolled. All of a sudden, it was like, here's a long ranger, but you got to talk about starting an aircraft and being paranoid on.
I prefer the long ranger though. So for our listeners out there that have not flown the B model or the long ranger, the B model, you press the button, the igniter goes, the compressor starts, and you just kind of snap the throttle into idle. And it does its whole fancy start, not fancy at all, but it does its sequence starts. And you just hope that it doesn't blow up. And if it does, you just got to hold down the button and roll off. Whereas the Long Ranger, it's modulated. So I don't know what the technique you taught is, but at Air Evac Life Team, they're still rocking the Long Ranger. So I ended up flying that as well. And we did the 2 fingers, one on the igniter, one on the throttle release button, tab, whatever it's called. And so you press the button and then you just kind of inch it in, which was super nerve-wracking in the beginning. But do you agree that long-term it was like you had control of it and you're like, it's just way better?
I think after like 2 weeks of flying it every day, you're just like, oh, this is great. I still like the first 2 weeks probably held my breath the entire start too. But totally. Yeah. I haven't been in an L long-term in a little while now. So I remember I took about a whole season off of being in an L. And then at the end of the season, they're like, oh, hey, we've got this call we needed burn contract for a couple weeks. Like, it's in the L. I was like, cool. I was like, oh, God, I haven't started L in
let me go start that real fast.
Let me not screw this up. I'd like to keep my employment.
So that's around 2016-ish you started flying fire contracts. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, and it was a CW, and it was a call we needed contract on it. So I still just flying random off the ramp utility work for the company.
Okay.
So that's actually, I got in, did some LiDAR time, power line inspections, pipeline patrols, random tours of the Portland area, the gorge, wine tours, whatever random things.
50 Shades of Grey flights with the Heathman Hotel there in
I did
Portland.
not. Oh, I didn't see. I never got to do that one.
I had like 3 of them.
Nice.
Yeah, it was weird. In fact, I remember one of the ladies like threw up all over the back of the 44. It's like not so romantic, lady. That's
no, you lost its cool all of a sudden.
You really that the spark is gone.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, because I'm not a utility guy. I've been I call it like the white collar path of flying, like the super boring stuff, like go fly circles in the Grand Canyon, go fly EMS, which is there's some complexity to it, but at the end of the day, it's like usually taking some sick person from one podunk hospital to the city. I mean, it's very much a milk run.
Right.
So I've never really been in the utility world, and I think that there's probably a lot of listeners that are out there that would be really interested to hear what that's all about. So educate me. I'd love to learn about what this is all about.
I'm going to teach you something today, Halsey.
Perfect. I love it. That maple syrup.
I'll try to just send you more maple syrup too while we're at it.
We'll take it.
Yeah. So I mean, the utility side, and this is a debatable topic. I'm sure you've read some of the pilot forums where they're like, "Oh, you're not utility. You're not pulling power line. You're not putting poles up for construction." And I'll let them argue that, make themselves feel better about it. And I'm not knocking any of the guys that do that, by the way.
Sure.
Just my experience in the utility world is primarily fire.
Okay.
On it. So got through that first season. 2017 was actually started the year out doing some cherry drying in Jet Ranger, which I'd never done before. So that was interesting. It didn't rain a lot that year, so we didn't fly much. So I got great sun. I had this awesome tan going by like end of June.
It's like oddly dangerous, that job, right? Is it like, I remember like one year,
sketchy.
like 3 fatal accidents, like wire strike and.
Yeah. Power lines clipping around, fields, your orchards are flying over. It's interesting. That's for sure. I had fun. I enjoyed it. It was a little challenging, just something I'd never done before. And I was out there with another one. We had 2 Jet Rangers out on that contract. So that was interesting work, and cherry season wrapped up, and I'm like, cool, here's your long ranger back for fire season. It's still a call when needed. Then Franz calls one day and was like, hey, we're sending you to Hood River. And I'm like, oh, well, that's convenient. That's right down the road.
Certainly worst place to be, too.
Yeah. Like, talking to everybody that's been doing fire long enough at that point, they're like, oh, lucky you.
Yeah. That's way better than, like, Burns.
Oh, Burns. Yeah, so we get out there, and I'm thinking, like, it's like day 1 of fire. Cool. What are we doing? Oh, it's some 60-acre fire way up this drainage in the gorge. It really isn't doing much. They're like, we just basically need a light helicopter out here to throw some bodies on, be able to recon it, keep an eye on it. We had a Chinook out there, a Columbia Chinook sitting in Hood River. Oddly enough, another one of our former coworkers, Wesley Griffin, was on that aircraft, so I landed there with mine, and later that day, Wes is like, I knew that voice and that tail number.
It's so funny.
I was like, man, that's so cool. We goofed around out there. Great experience for me, really relaxed. This wasn't some big crazy 16 helicopter helibase with some 45,000 acre fire ripping into neighborhoods. We're babysitting something up in the woods. We're like, cool. It was up on a really steep slope. Nobody could hike to it. They couldn't attack it from the ground. So like, we'll just smash it with water every now and then. And that thing just wouldn't go away. God, that thing just sat there for weeks.
It's like smoldered.
Yeah. And 3 days in a row, there'd be no smoke on it. Day 4, you go up there and you're like, oh, well, it woke up. And,
it's on fire again.
And then it kind of became this other cool thing. Like, we have a helicopter here. Like, we just got a bunch of lightning up by Mount Adams. Why don't you guys go check it out? So we slowly just started branching our missions out, which is, I don't think I could have, looking back, started in the fire industry any easier than the way it worked out. It was go fly some recon. Yeah, exactly. It was very low stress, low pace. and people that were like, oh, you're new, let me help you. That was another great aspect. I just ended up with these great aircraft managers and firefighters I was working with that were all like, oh, this is your first season with us. Cool. And then, as you know, being an Oregon native, in September of 2017, when the Eagle Creek fire lit off, Columbia River Gorge went from being this little 500-acre putzing around fire to, I think at one point we had 18 or 20 helicopters in the gorge.
Yeah, it's national news for every night. I mean, it was crazy.
Night one of it, which I don't remember, a lot of people remember, there was 150 hikers trapped between our little fire and the new one that firefighters went in and hiked out overnight. And you've hiked probably Eagle Creek before, right?
Oh yeah.
Not an easy trail if you don't.
No, terrifying actually. Hiker. I hate that. Yeah. I hate that trail.
It's beautiful. One of my favorite areas in the gorge, but
terrifying.
They're hiking how many people out? Of course, it was my day off when this started, so that was another weird. I'm driving back down, I-84 back to Hood River, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of smoke up there. Texting with somebody back home, they're like, I think there's a new fire. I'm like, all right, Franz is flying my relief. That's always fun when your boss is your relief pilot. And
sure.
Yeah. Then I get to the helibase, all the helicopters flying. Everyone's scrambling. Everyone's getting worked up. Then I just remember Franz coming back in. And at that point, too, it's like Franz, he's our DO. And it's like, oh, this guy can go do any mission, do anything. And I think he was a little frazzled, too, coming back, just because the tempo went from this very laid-back atmosphere to this is going sideways fast. And so that was all of a sudden now my real fire experience.
How did that, I mean, first off, how did you manage that? But I mean, that has to be a common thing where you are flying around, enjoying it, going to Mount Adams, doing this kind of easy stuff, milk runs, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, this crazy level of intensity. I mean, did you have to have like a mental conversation with yourself? Like, hey, I know that there's a level here that's going to change, but I still need to do my own pace a little bit. There were
definitely some moments like that. One thing with kind of some of my background before I got into aviation was last minute, high stress situations on a ship. And so I just kind of, for me, it's actually easy to just kick gears, go focus on what we need to do. It's when we land, that weird decompression moment of it. It was a little tough sometimes. It was also more for me. It's like, oh, that's the gorge. I spent 3 years flying up and down this thing. Like,
yeah, it's sad.
It was, yeah. So it's also, it's your backyard and watching it burn. But that was also one thing too, a big eye opener with how a large fire works, how the amount of aircraft we had in the air, the airspace deconflictions going on. Like, hey, I need you to move out of the way. We're bringing tankers in. We're doing this. And this helicopter's coming in. And so the tempo picked up pretty intense. And I was not near, I mean, I'm going to sound silly maybe saying this to some people, but at one point I was like, this isn't nearly as stressful as everyone made it out to be. And, looking back on it 2 weeks later when we got home, I was like, oh my God, that was a mess.
Yeah, like you probably slept for 2 weeks.
Pretty much, yeah.
What's the communication? Is that done on like an FM radio set up in the helicopter?
Yeah, so most of our crew coordination, air to ground, repeaters scattered all over, those are FM radios on there. And then we'll still run our standard AM radios, aircraft to aircraft, with our air attack platforms or our Helco platforms, and coordinate aircraft that way. And then you're talking to the guys on the ground on an FM.
Yeah, and I can only imagine. I mean, I've flown a couple air medical scenes before where there's 1 or 2, 3 helicopters landing all at once, and it's a little bit stressful. But like, who's in charge of ensuring kind of this controlled chaos? In my head, it kind of sounds like who's the guy pointing directions?
So there's a very format structure to this. So if people aren't familiar, once you got X amount of aircraft up in there, generally more than 2. You bring in an air attack platform, and essentially somebody orbiting up above the fire, up above the aircraft working with a firefighter on board. They're in charge of the airspace. They're coordinating people in and out. So they'll take care of the flying side. Now, depending on how we're set up, like in this case, we're using a private landowner's field. At this point, we brought so many aircraft and set up an established helibase. So they've got a box sitting there. You basically have somebody you're talking to on the radio kind of clearing you in on, not an FAA clearance, but you're getting cleared for takeoff landings in there. They're calling traffic out, birds, winds on it. So it's relatively organized.
Yeah, they definitely know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And at that time, you're in a Long Ranger. I mean, is that an aircraft that they're utilizing still for scouting, or are you dropping water at that point?
So in that fire specifically, we weren't dropping water. I was flying about 6 hours a day, and they were all recon flights. So about every 2 hours, we'd put a whole new load of people that wanted to check the fire out. Division commanders, instant commanders, people in charge of the fire that need to look at the big picture, look at, perimeters, where we can stop the fire at, what's threatened if this goes 5 miles down the road, things like that. That's more, we were the only small helicopter there. Everything else was, a 205, a medium or bigger.
Sure.
So those guys are definitely the workhorses of the water side for sure on it. But I think at one point that Long Ranger was flying more than anybody else.
Yeah, you're just kind of that scout. Yeah, it makes sense. I could see that.
You're in the air all the time.
And again, though, it's kind of cool, though. I mean, talk about a good experience. Like, you got to kind of start off, ease into it. Then it got crazy, but you weren't, it's still probably super busy, but I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're dropping water, especially if you're doing it a lot, I mean, that's probably somewhat exhausting and a kind of a new level of intensity. Is that true?
Yeah, it can be. It's kind of a two-sided thing for me. It's like I land somewhere, kick the crew out. We're going to initial attack this fire. They'll slap the bucket on. And then you're like, cool, I'm in the aircraft by myself. Like, now my favorite fires where they haven't even hiked up to it, but I can beat them with water. And you'd have nobody on the ground yet. You're not talking to anybody. You're not worried about somebody being under you on a drop, and you're just kind of doing your own thing. So you can actually take a pause. Like, there's no rush on these missions. There's no like, you didn't get me 17 buckets. You only brought me 14. Nothing like that. That's not how the industry works out there. It's the safety culture is a lot higher. It's not production work on it. So kind of get that nice like calm moment. Like, I'm in the aircraft by myself. It's chill on there. You get guys on the ground now. They'll start calling your drops, directing where they want buckets and things. And the pace can pick up. My current contract right now, so we're going into year 4 of a 4-year contract. So this is our last year. So I've been working with the same crew the last 3 seasons.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome. And one thing I like, kind of bring up when I've talked to like flight students or CFIs, like, oh, how do you get into it? When we talk about CRM and aviation, a lot of people, it's always just like, oh, well, that's 2 pilot crews. Yes, we have 2 pilot crews out on fires. We're flying a light. I'm flying a 407 right now. It's single pilot everything. But there is a massive amount of CRM that has to happen between the crew, your aircraft manager, the firefighters on the ground. And so kind of after 3 seasons with these guys, it can get stressful. You're running buckets all day. It can definitely get exhausting what you're bringing. You might not notice it at the time. It's, again, when you land and shut down, you step out of the aircraft and you're like, oh, man, I need a break.
Yeah, totally.
But I think because there is this great CRM aspect to it too, it does the mental exhaustion workload. For me, what I've noticed is kind of dropped over the years. Like, all right, I know exactly what these guys are going to ask for when they get up there. Like, we might change plans last minute and on the fly, but we're just, the way we brief it and the way we discuss it and come up with that decision it's not stressful. Like, it's going to happen. And that's part of, you have to understand, you got to adapt, you got to change, be flexible with the mission. But having the right people and the right CRM working that situation does alleviate so much of the stress.
Yeah, and it's nice. I mean, especially after you've been working with the same people, I mean, you become like in sync. Like, you're just really being able to, it's like finishing the guy's sentence, before they can, like, you just know what's happening. And so I think that's really, probably a cool thing, and specifically in that kind of environment, where it can be stressful, to be able to rely on other people. And I think that's a really good point that you bring up. As like a pilot, we sometimes feel like, hey, we're the ones shaking the stick up front. We're we're the cool ones, we're doing all the cool stuff and we're the most important ones, but it's really a supporting cast. And
it is. We're a tool for these guys. We're just one of their tools in a toolbox of things they can use to help their mission. At the end of the day, we're contracted to them, that it's their use of the aircraft, what they want us to do. So that's having that coordination with people is super key in this, for a multitude of different reasons, but to keep the safety level up as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, air medical is the same kind of deal. It's like the crew in the back is like the some people say the self-loading baggage. And, at a point, I would argue that, the crew's the crew. I mean, there's not much they can do sitting in the back. However, you actually do learn pretty fast. Like, man, there's a lot of things that they can do. They can help with the FM radio. They can always be looking out for traffic. The air medical crew takes it extremely seriously. Most do. And, I felt like, man, if I include them within what I'm doing, then I'm only enhancing my environment of safety.
100%.
And, I just think that it's probably a negative culture or a negative way to look at, like, oh, I'm the final authority here. Like, I'm not going to listen to anyone else. And that's probably, I mean, in the air medical world, at least, like, that's how you don't make friends. Like, if you want to be at a base where everyone hates you, be that guy.
I mean, I kind of look at it, if you want to not be a team player and a people person in the aircraft, or have other people question, and it doesn't have to be in a rude way, just question something like, hey, did you see that bird over there? Did you see that wire? Hey, instead of being like, yeah, man, I've landed here 30 times. Like, no, that's not the environment. That's not the CRM. That's not the attitude we want in the aircraft ever. But I'm like, you want to kind of be that pilot? I'm like, go fly restricted old Huey with a bucket only and never put a crew on board. I take the fact that we are, I'd say 90% of our flights are manned with the crew. Yeah. And they're putting their trust in me as a pilot, in the aircraft as a machine, to get their job done. So I'm also going to put the trust in, oh, it's your first flight back there? And all of a sudden, like, we're coming into land. You're like, oh, what's that over there? Like, call it out, question it. You're new to this. Yeah. You don't know any better. I can pull this thing out of this approach, circle around, we'll talk about it. And that's it. Like, that's the end. You're not going to hurt my feelings.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we would have it like we would have like a new med crew, and they'd be like, traffic 3:00. And I would look, and it would be like a Boeing 737 at like 30,000 feet. And I'm like, well, that's good. And I appreciate that. Always feel free to call that out.
Yeah. Not
necessarily a factor, but, good eye. It's just kind of, getting them used to that environment. But it's silly not to use your resources and your tools.
No, 100%. One other big part, like the current contract I'm on now, our spring, like I mentioned earlier, we're about ready to leave in 2.5, 3 weeks. We head out east. We head to Illinois, Missouri, Michigan, and start early. Region 8, Region 9, the eastern regions start a lot of prescribed burns this time of year.
Really?
So that's our we'll load the aircraft up with a PSD machine and light the ground on fire and burn things down.
No way. Shoot, like is that like the ping pong balls of fire?
Yep, exactly.
Oh my God. I didn't know y'all did that.
Yeah, that's our primary work when we're out there. I mean, we're still initial attack fire support whenever needed, but that's our primary objective for most of our flying out there early in the year. It's a low flight. You're not that high off the ground. The machines we're running are a little newer. We can run them up 300, 400 feet, about 60 knots. Some of the older machines, you're down lower and slower. So it's a not warm and fuzzy profile. We're kind of hanging in that HV curve. Well, you're hanging in the HV curve all the time doing bucket work, long line work, but nobody's on board with you.
Yeah, just you. You're the unfortunate one.
Prescribed for aerial ignition, you've got at least 2 on board with you, if not 3 sometimes. And so those, for me, that's where the CRM in the aircraft just is. It's got to be there. It's got to be huge. I work with a really, really amazing crew. I'll throw props out to those guys that they've been in aviation a long time. We're at a rappel base. These guys rappel out of 205s. It's a rappel crew, and they just happen to staff our 407 as well. The rappel world, short haul world, all those worlds have some very orchestrated SOP safety procedures in place. So I'm flying all the time with guys who are doing some higher risk missions than just getting crew shuttle up to the fire.
Sure.
They're sitting in a 205 and an OG hover at 300 feet, throwing ropes out the side and sliding down them. So
what's the worst that could happen?
First time I watched this live, I was just like, oh, why?
I know, it's terrifying. I mean, it would be like the most exciting thing.
And they do it well. Oh, yeah. I'm amazed when they go do it. Even just watching proficiencies at the airport when they're rappelling, to the runway or a grass field, wherever they're going into. It's just like, oh, you guys are so cool.
Yeah, I saw some DPS guys doing that the other day in San Antonio, and I was like, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, also, it doesn't take much. I think pilots in general, we probably nerd out over any aircraft thing. So
yeah,
this is cool. What I appreciate that too with this crew specifically is you have some very experienced aviation professionals. They're not pilots, but they've been putting their entire career in aircraft, a lot of them. So when we get into the burn season, we had a couple years back, there was a fatality down in Texas on a burn. There's been previous fatalities on prescribed burns with the aircraft accidents. So people are a little touchy about it. It gets brought up. I've talked to a lot of pilots who've been burning for years, and they're just like, get in the bird and go fly. It's not hard. It's not hard. It's not hard flying. It's straight and level. Flip a U-turn, run a track next to where you just drop balls. But you're low, slow profile. The winds get shifty.
Yeah.
Don't put balls over the line outside of where we're supposed to be burning. So it's like sometimes your turns get a little snappy, and we're always briefing LT conditions, wind conditions, or what? Oh, that machine in the back. What happens when that thing goes sideways? And
I'm on fire.
Yeah, we haven't had any major issues out there ever with the machine, which is good. You get one jam every now and then, and there's protocols where to fix it clear, and just always climb the aircraft up higher and safer until we're ready to go again.
Yeah, I think anytime you're flying a helicopter, I mean, no matter whether you're flying a complex mission, short haul, the Tetons, or you're, flying circles, E&G in San Antonio, I mean, you have to always have a level of intensity. I mean, at any point, for me personally, I'm always kind of planning like, all right, well, what's going to happen when, I'm over the highway right now and doesn't really seem to be a great landing area. It's like, where am I going to go? Like, it's just always being, prepared and having that readiness. And
I still think some of my most stressful flights to this day are photo flights in R-22 in downtown Portland.
Oh, God. No thanks.
Yeah, I look back on them like, whew. Like, man, how many years of that did I do?
I think I was oddly thinking about that today. I don't know why. I think my wife was talking about something in regards to Zach Whitehead flying photo flights, something on a bio that we just wrote on him, and I just like remembered. I was like, oh my God, I did that like a lot. Scary.
Yeah. Nope.
So
I think,
we are getting close to end time here, but I do want to broach this subject because I feel like hopefully as the listeners grow here and the audience grows, I hope it's not just a bunch of dudes listening. I feel like the industry is lacking in female pilots. I mean, it's always kind of been a bit of a boys' club. What is that?
Right.
What is that scenario like? I mean, you obviously were in the military, which one would argue is also kind of more of a boys' club.
The Navy is the original good old boys' club, I'm sure, at some point. So, it is. It's different being just even the fact you show up somewhere 99% of the time, I'm going to be the only female pilot in the group. Every helibase I've been on, I'm the only girl. So, I mean, that on its own, it's got its perks. Everybody knows you immediately. So it's really nice to make connections. It has the downside too. Everybody knows whose female voice is on the radio. So if you screw anything up, it's really easy to pinpoint. The industry definitely, the numbers are low. I think overall in aviation, they're still sitting around 7% female pilots. That's helicopter or fixed wing. As a whole, numbers are going up slowly.
What do you think? I mean, what's your hypothesis? Because I look at it like my wife. Like, she's just not like, I feel like she was just born not to like want to love driving or flying things. Like, it's just like for her, it's like this mentality of not. And I feel like a lot of women are that way. But do you think it's just because socially they're raised that way?
I don't know if I would say it's so much that either. I think there is just an inherent thing where you have to have an interest in aviation to get into it, for sure. And it's like I've done little seminars and spoke to a bunch of teenage girls about getting into aviation before, and 2 or 3 of them are like, "This sounds cool," and the rest are like, "Cool, nice to meet you, thanks for talking."
Yeah.
And that's cool. Like, that's fine. I mean, you go speak for teenage kids. It's to get them an exposure. I think we're cresting past the point where it wasn't that women aren't exposed or know that these jobs are out there and they can go do it and they're welcome out in the field anymore. I think we passed that point where women 20, 30 years ago was definitely a different industry. Right?
Sure.
You didn't see female airline pilots. You probably didn't see female helicopter pilots anywhere.
No.
So there's definitely more. Last year, I know a handful of girls jumped in first fire season years. That's great. Like to see more girls getting into this side of the industry as well. I do think part of it's just exposure and letting people like, hey, I have an interest in this and I don't.
Yeah, it's true. It's just funny. It's because still in my career, I mean, it's very. I see a female helicopter pilot. It's almost like, you know, you just don't see it every day. It's just crazy. It's like you don't run into it, you know. But it's cool. I mean, I think that I always felt like from a flight instructor standpoint, at least, flying with a female student was always easier because there was a lack of ego compared to flying with a dude, where the guy had to be perfect. Now, I would also argue that on the female side, there's maybe some hesitancy or some other things that were like you could just tell
100%.
like different from a guy and a girl in the training environment. But I honestly think that it was easier to teach a female student than most guy students. And I felt like women were respectful of the machine. It wasn't so much about like I had to be great and perfect right away. It was like it seemed like women were okay to go with the flow and kind of be in the process where I'm like, I'm on my first day of school and I'm like, why can't I auto? You know, I should be able to do this, you know.
I mean, I've had some situations, like one of my pet peeves with people is always like, oh, well, the last pilot we had did this. And I'm like, cool, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Like, and there's always some underlying comment. There's the tone behind that comment's usually like, oh, you're the first girl we've flown with, and so they want to make a point. And I'm like, again, you know, I used to try to be like, I would get like, why would you make comments like that? And also it's easy for me to let stuff roll off my shoulders. It's at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I've had mechanics tell me they appreciate female pilots more because we're nicer to the aircraft, which I think is probably a true story. I think we're probably,
I could see
probably
that.
a little gentler and a little friendlier. I've had other pilots tell me like, oh, you know, you talk to, you know, pilot A over here and they're going to go do the same mission as you. And then at one point I'm like, hey, like we're going to call it off for the day or the winds suck. Something changed. And they're like, oh, well, this guy's still out flying. I'm like, okay. Again, that's their personal choice, not my, like, so, I mean, yeah, maybe most girls I know flying, I think we might be a little more conservative with some of our flying in the sense of we don't have the ego. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. I don't have to go out and prove anything. I just go out and do my job safely every day, bring the crew home safely, bring the machine back in the same condition and call it a day. So there's those things on it.
It's a funny thing, and I definitely see that the industry is growing with females.
Oh,
like it's
100%.
Like it's definitely there's more women getting involved. It's more of a thing, and I hope it continues. And I think that being able to have have strong female figures within an industry is good. So I appreciate you coming on to the Helicopter Podcast. Not only are you my first female guest, you're my second guest ever. So it's
awesome.
we're 50-50. We keep it even with guys and girls here on the show. We had Sean Moretz last week,
right? Which was a great one. That was a great podcast, I love Sean. By the way.
Sean's
awesome.
Sean's the man. And we're going to continue to have Sean on in the future with some DPE, kind of, ask the DPE.
Awesome.
And with that, we'd love to keep in touch with you. Love to, I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface today on what you're doing and whatnot. So I hope that you're willing to come back. This wasn't hopefully too painful of an experience.
This was awesome.
But I really enjoyed it. But yeah, it's been an hour, so we're going to wrap it up. But Emily Spates, thank you so much.
Thank you, Halsey.
Excuse me. And I'm like choking over here. And for our listeners out there, go ahead to the Helicopter Podcast Facebook page. Please like us, comment, leave or troll me. I don't care. Like, more people talking on Facebook is better for me. No press is bad press. What I would love, though, is if you have positive feedback on guests or questions that you might have or things that you might want to learn about. The whole point of this is to bring value to our listeners. So it's great to have guests like Emily, and I hope that there's other people out there that want to talk. So thank you again, Emily, and thanks everyone for listening to the Helicopter Podcast.
As always, a special thanks to Helicopter for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, Helicopter is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. Helicopter's team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, Helicopter will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text Helicopter to 1-855-Helicopter. That's Helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a Helicopter pilot agent will reach out. Helicopter. List it, sell it, done.